So with that, I will hand it over to our State Director, Locke Ogans, who will introduce herself and our speaker. Locke?
Thank you, Margaret, and welcome everybody. We are so thrilled to have you here with us today for our third in a series of these TNC Virginia webinars. And we are really sorry that we can't see you in person. We miss that interaction a lot, but we are grateful for these opportunities to share the good work that goes on in conservation here in Virginia, notwithstanding the trials of COVID-19. And I hope you're all well. And there are over 200 of you that had registered for this webinar. So thank you very much for tuning in with us today. And I just want to make a quick note before I introduce Jill that our next webinar is going to be on October the 29th. And we will be speaking with our world-class conservation team down in Southwest Virginia about their work to leverage carbon markets for conservation in the Clinch Valley. And that will be another really interesting session. But today, we're all thrilled to be here with you celebrating the 50th anniversary of our work on the Eastern Shore of Virginia. And this anniversary, we have decided is an opportunity for celebration, for reflection, and for elevating the work of this program across the globe. And in that spirit, I have some really exciting news that I'd like to share before I introduce Jill. We have recently announced the renaming of TNC's conservation program on the Eastern Shore in recognition of the Volgenau Foundation's long-term support of the Conservancy. And so we're delighted to celebrate with you here today the new Volgenau Virginia Coast Reserve, and we couldn't be any more excited about that. The naming honors Dr. Ernst Volgenau and his family, some of whom are on this call with us, and thank you all for joining. We appreciate that, for the conservation impact that they've had over 3 decades supporting TNC projects, literally from coast to coast, from Virginia all the way out to California. And the family has a very long and deep history at the Virginia Coast Reserve, sharing not only their time and their treasure, but also their talent, including boots on the ground volunteer work to really help our program there grow. And we are really grateful for that and couldn't be more excited about the Volgenau Virginia Coast Reserve. To mark the program's 50th anniversary, the Foundation's most recent contribution to TNC is a leadership gift in the amount of $5 million to the Volgenau Virginia Coast Reserve, which they hope will inspire others to help support the next 50 years or half century, it seems like a long time, of innovative science and conservation in one of Virginia's and really the world's most iconic landscapes. It is a true treasure. And leading that treasure is Jill Bieri, who is the director of the Volgenau Virginia Coast Reserve. And Jill leads a staff of 12 incredible people who work to protect and restore and sustain the barrier islands, the coastal lagoons, and the bayside ecosystems of Virginia's Eastern Shore. Excuse me. Jill has a master's degree in marine science from the College of William and Mary's Virginia Institute of Marine Science. And she's got over 30 years, or nearly 30 years, sorry, Jill. I know you started when you were like 3, working on the Chesapeake and the coastal bays. And she's just the right person to have at the helm, leading an incredible team at this important juncture in the reserve's history. And so with that, Jill, and with a lot of thanks for all that you and your team do, I'll turn it over to you.
Thank you, Locke, and thank you all for joining us today. I don't think there's anything I enjoy more than talking and sharing stories about the Virginia Coast Reserve and the incredible place that it is on our planet. So thank you for joining in. I represent today not only that current wonderful staff that Locke referenced that are full of passion and great work out here on the Eastern Shore, but I represent all those who have worked for the Nature Conservancy out here for the last 50 years. And I represent deep partnerships that really have made this work possible for 50 years, supporters who had the vision to protect this place, and those who continue to lead and support our work. We thank them, and I'm hoping to reflect that back to you today. And I can't not mention the hundreds of volunteers who contribute to all aspects of our work on an annual basis. So I hope that will all come through in this presentation. And throughout the presentation, there's going to be some video clips. And I want to thank Teleduction for providing those video clips. And I'll talk about their contribution to a larger film later in the presentation. But the video clips are here because I think it's really important for you to hear from our partners and our community members and other staff, actually have their voices as part of this presentation. I'm really excited to talk about how we're celebrating all the work that has happened in the last 50 years at the Virginia Coast Reserve. I want to reflect on our history and the importance of the vision that people had in protecting this really important place on the coast. And I want to talk about how this really local program is having global impacts and how we're elevating that program to do that in the future. Next slide, please. I always like to start out with a map. Where in the world are we? And so this map will fly in, of course, to the east coast of the United States. We are along the Delmarva Peninsula, so portions of Delaware, Maryland, and of course, we are the Virginia portion of that peninsula. We are a 75-mile long, very rural peninsula community. We have less than 50,000 people living in 2 counties. We have Northampton County to the south and Accomack County to the north. But those 50,000 people, and I'm one of those that live out here on the Eastern Shore, we're all connected to this landscape, to this natural area. We're connected to the Chesapeake Bay to the west. We're connected to the Atlantic Ocean to the east, the coastal bays, the marshes. Our economy and our culture are really all interwoven with this nature. And so we'll talk about that. Next slide, please. This is a time lapse, a decadal time lapse that's showing you the conservation lands and how they increased from 1970, when the Nature Conservancy first began investing and being interested in here on the Eastern Shore, and they go through to the present time. And they're really showing you this protection over time, and we'll talk about that and refer to that as we go forward. In the 1960s, just like every coastal area along the east coast of the United States, everyone wanted to live on the water. And it became, coastal development just really began to explode. Here on the Eastern Shore, it was not an exception. And as soon as the Chesapeake Bay Bridge Tunnel was completed in 1964, developers really began looking at these barrier islands as a place for development. In fact, the Smith Island Development Corporation was making plans, and we've seen those plans, we have copies of those plans, to build a $150 million resort on several of the lower barrier islands. And that's when the Nature Conservancy's Pat Noonan, along with Ned Ames from the Mary Flagler Carey Trust, decided that this was a great time to seize the opportunity to begin the acquisition and the ultimate protection of not only those lower barrier islands that were in imminent threat of development, but this entire barrier island ecosystem. By 1975, the Virginia Coast Reserve encompassed nearly all of 14 barrier and marsh islands, the longest stretch of coastal wilderness along the east coast of the United States. Next slide, please. And we'll flash forward to 2020, where we are now on our Eastern Shore Peninsula. And those barrier islands were protected. And then later this protection would broaden to include the nearshore marine areas. Really, very much all of the Eastern Shore, portions of the entire Eastern Shore, including those barrier islands, that extensive marsh system, the mud flats, the upland habitats and forests. In total, we have 133,000 acres here protected with our partners from federal and state and local organizations. And it didn't stop with protection and conservation. This partnership with all of these really important partners and the community here extends to the management of the Eastern Shore and its protected areas and the stewardship of this place. The Nature Conservancy owns and or manages about 40,000 of these acres here on the Eastern Shore. And about 13,000 of them are privately owned lands that are in conservation easement. And we have 50 miles of Atlantic coastline here, a wonderful, beautiful protected area. Next slide, please. We're able to, because this conservation and protection is long-term, we are able to, and it's in a rural community, we're really able to demonstrate the positive impact all of this land protection and conservation has on our local economy. In 2017, the George Mason University conducted an independent study that looked at the economic impacts to both Northampton and Accomack counties. And we found there were direct impacts, things like there's a lot of people that work for those federal, state, and local agencies like the Nature Conservancy. The conservation field employs about 500 people here on the Eastern Shore. We all live and work and have an impact on the economy. It also is those landowners, those private landowners who hold conservation easements, they continue to pay taxes to our local counties, also helping our economy. The large protected areas have a huge indirect impact as well. We have a growing ecotourism business here. We have people that visit because of our nature. They come to fish, they come to bird watch, they come to kayak, they come to enjoy, and they stay here and they help our economy. And we have this great water quality on the coastal bayside and the bayside of the Eastern Shore, mostly in part because of all the protection that has happened. And it supports a thriving oyster and clam aquaculture industry. Next slide and video, please. No sound.
I'm getting in touch with Larea to let her know we don't have sound.
What would a webinar be without technical difficulties, right?
That's right.
Adapt their clam culture equipment to growing. Definitely among some of the first people to incorporate caged aquaculture, off-bottom techniques, and helped some of the other larger companies at the time adapt their clam culture equipment to growing oysters. There's no other place on the eastern seaboard of the United States that has this long of a stretch of preserved wild coastline, and that has been very responsible for the success of our industry. The water is extremely clean. When we pull an oyster out of the water, it is that place. There's nothing we've done that affects that flavor. We can partially affect the shape and do a few things like that through culture techniques, but the flavor is the flavor. Hurricane comes up the coast and they shut it down from South Carolina to Maine. We're the only body of water that's open on the East Coast sometimes. And that's because the Nature Conservancy, and that's because they've protected something that is that's truly unique on the East Coast.
Great, thank you. Thanks, Tom. Best clams and oysters in the world, for sure. With the protection of this vast coastal wilderness comes the responsibility that the Nature Conservancy and all of our partners here who are protecting and conserving this land, we're committed to managing the species that rely on these barrier islands, on these marshes, on these mud flats, and these upland habitats to survive. Next slide, please. For 5 decades, the Nature Conservancy has played an important role in developing and prioritizing and implementing really important research that has uncovered information that's critical to ensuring the resiliency of many migratory bird species of concern, including the American oystercatcher shown here and the piping plover. These really deep and long partnerships, and some of the logos I'm trying to just depict here to show how many partners are really working together in this important place. These long partnerships and with our academic partners and our state and federal agencies really make all this work possible. And the Virginia Coast Reserve is one of the most important regions for migratory birds in the Western Hemisphere. Next slide and video, please.
We're lucky that we have the Virginia Coast Reserve, and we're lucky that it's positioned where it is. We happen to be at a latitude where we're sort of at a continental crossroads, where we have many species that migrate through. We happen to represent the northern range limit for a number of species and the southern range limit for a number of other species. So it's sort of a nexus of diversity. And so it's really fortunate that the Virginia Coast Reserve happens to be at this latitude. When you look up and down the Atlantic coast, there's really no other place that represents this sort of intact ecosystem.
Great. Next slide. The Virginia Coast Reserve is a living laboratory, and you'll hear me use that phrase throughout this presentation. We talk about this place as a living laboratory. And in the late 1980s, the National Science Foundation actually designated this as one of now 28 long-term ecological research sites in the United States. And the National Science Foundation provides funding and support to the University of Virginia and many research academic partners to do this work of a living laboratory. Through this long-term ecological research program, the Virginia Coast Reserve really provides the place to conduct research, looking at the impacts of this natural system. Our natural systems are intact. We have extensive marshes and the barrier island system that's intact, seagrasses, oysters, and we're able to look at impacts due to climate change, changes in temperature, changes in currents and other factors, and see really what that impact is over a long term to these natural systems. That long-term data that we are fortunate enough to have here and the partnerships that really do that research out here inform models that can then later inform global responses to how we're dealing with climate change in coastal systems everywhere. Next slide, please. In this living laboratory of the Virginia Coast Reserve, marine habitat restoration, specifically the restoration of eelgrass and restoration of oysters, is really, we're able to have success at a large enough scale that we're seeing impacts to the entire system. We're able to see the real ecosystem services that an eelgrass bed, the habitat, the water quality, you know, the slowing of the waves. We're actually able to see that because our eelgrass restoration is so large and successful. The same with oysters. We're seeing more improvements in water quality, and we're seeing more diversity of fish using both the oyster reefs and the eelgrass beds. So the restoration efforts here are really allowing us to see the services that all of this restoration provides and seeing a state change throughout this entire system. Next slide. Oyster restoration at the Virginia Coast Reserve is really informing the practice of oyster restoration around the world. We have researchers and visitors and people that want to learn about oyster restoration visiting from Hong Kong, from China, from New Zealand, from Europe. So this is really a place where people are learning how to do this type of restoration. Next slide. And our eelgrass disappeared from our coastal bays in the 1930s. So first from a fungal disease and then from the storm of 1933, if there was any eelgrass left, it was wiped out after that. So we have zero eelgrass in the coastal bays, and we began a couple decades ago doing restoration here. And we have gone, because we have the enabling conditions, the great water quality, and we have gone from 0 to 9,000 acres, the largest successful seagrass restoration in the world, right here on the eastern shore of Virginia. And with that restoration, of course, comes the ability to reintroduce the bay scallop, which also disappeared after in the 1930s with the eelgrass. We're reintroducing it with our partners from the Virginia Institute of Marine Science, hoping someday it might be a recreational or maybe a commercial fishery. And this seagrass really has a huge ability to store carbon. So it keeps carbon from being in the atmosphere. It's a sink for carbon. And this large eelgrass restoration is actually providing the perfect site for us to implement the first ever blue carbon seagrass project on the planet. Next slide. And video.
We're out here in really a world-class example of how a marine habitat can be brought back at a huge scale that really starts to change the whole way the whole system around it works. We are standing on top of a 4,000 acre underwater prairie that is 4,000 of 9,000 total acres that we have restored out here from 0 acres. We would never have been able to get this project going to the scale that we've achieved here had we not had really fantastic coastal water quality. And we have that coastal water quality in part because of our local community here, takes good care of its own, and also in part because the Nature Conservancy started investing in this area and protecting these lands, these islands, these bays, all those years ago.
In terms of climate change, Virginia's Eastern Shore is also one of the nation's most threatened coastal regions. We're seeing sea level rise rates here on the Eastern Shore at 2 to 3 times the global average. And of course, we're seeing more frequent and more intense storms. Next slide and video.
We've seen more Category 5 hurricanes in the last several years than we've ever seen before. We're having floods occurring on many high tides, and in a decade, floods will probably occur on every high tide in the Norfolk Hampton Roads areas.
I honestly do not have any conception of what it's going to be like 20 years from now, 30 years from now. My only fear is it seems over the years to be progressing more than it was predicted 10 years before that.
So there's a new reality that we have to live with, and we can't just learn from the past. We have to be able to create new models and new understandings in order to forecast what may happen in the future so that we can make better decisions.
So here's this word again, this term again. Virginia Coast Reserve is a living laboratory for coastal resilience. So this long-term protection that we see here in this place on the coast, coupled with all of the long-term research that's been going on, make this really just an incredible place to demonstrate the impacts of climate change on the natural system. But let's be clear, impacts of climate change are not just impacting the natural system. Coastal communities worldwide are seeing their culture as well as their economy impacted by these impacts. And that's really important to think about the way of life that is changing with climate impacts. So our coastal resilience program here at the Virginia Coast Reserve, and really worldwide, globally for the Nature Conservancy, includes engaging with these local communities where we live and work and where we are just, really invested in. Customization of tools that can help predict future scenarios so we can make informed decisions. And looking and demonstrating and using nature-based solutions to increase the resilience and provide adaptation strategies. And this includes things like living shorelines, oyster restoration, seagrass restoration as a nature-based solution. Next slide. Of high priority here on the Eastern Shore is engaging with this community in terms of coastal resilience in our process. Through relationships and workshops and listening sessions, we work with our community to really hear where the impacts are, what they need in terms of information to move forward. How do we take complex data and models and get it in the hands of decision makers that can predict what's going to happen in the future, or at least have an idea and make decisions based on that? Where are the most vulnerable areas? What resources do these communities need? What parts of the community are being impacted? What infrastructure? Roads, schools, emergency management systems. And then, of course, we're the Nature Conservancy. So we want to know how and where nature can be part of that solution. Next slide. And the community stakeholders and community decision makers were a big part in helping us develop an Eastern Shore of Virginia coastal resilience tool. So the coastal resilience tool is a framework that the Nature Conservancy developed and is implementing worldwide. We're customizing it. We're taking the framework and we're taking local data, like here at the Virginia Coast Reserve, and we're customizing it to be able to look at the impact sea level rise and flooding and storms will have on our natural systems and our communities in these coastal areas. Next slide, please. And go to the next slide. So I just wanted to show you a little bit about the utility of this tool because it's pretty cool. And I'll put up the website at the end of the talk so you can explore on your own. But this picture that takes up most of your screen is of the village of Oysters. This is Oyster Harbor on the seaside of Northampton County. And on the left hand is sort of our driver, our steering wheel of different scenarios we can create to see what happens in terms of flooding with increases in sea level rise rate. If you go to the next slide, it will show you that we can look at current conditions here in 2020 with a low intensity storm. And within the tool, we've defined what a low, what a medium, what a high intensity storm is. And of course, we can set these parameters and look at the flooding impacts in this particular location. You're looking at the colors and the key. And of course, the deeper the flooding, the depth of water, we see oranges and yellows that are on the screen. And then if you go to the next slide, if we were to take that same intensity of a low intensity storm in 2040, when sea level rise has increased, that same intensity storm will have a larger impact. So you're seeing more of that yellow and orange color in this area. And then just to show you in 2065, 25 years later, you'll see again that same low intensity storm, but with greater impact on flooding in this area because sea level rise is predicted, of course, to increase over time. So I invite you to explore this great tool. There's many other apps that show you how natural systems are responding to changes due to sea level rise and storms. And you can look at living shorelines and all other applications. So I encourage you to take a look at it. Next slide, please. And video.
Healthy natural ecosystems protect coastal communities, and they are resilient to a point. We need nature-based solutions in order to protect coastal communities. So it's not just about trying to keep the water out anymore and putting a barrier. It's about learning to live with water. And so understanding how these natural systems can help that both in rural communities but also in cities like Norfolk and Hampton Roads is really critical to adapting to climate impacts.
A great example of a nature-based solution is a project that's being funded by the National Fish and Wildlife Foundation right now. It's a 3-year project along a marsh shoreline just outside of the town of Wachapreague, of course, on the seaside of the Eastern Shore. And here we're using two different kinds of oyster substrates. So we've been doing oyster restoration for decades, using shell and using different substrate material and creating reef structures and all the benefits of those reef structures we're seeing in these coastal bays. We're now taking that oyster restoration and we're strategically placing the structures along marsh shorelines in hopes that these oyster restoration, these reefs, will help to decrease the current and maybe decrease the erosion and the disappearance of some of these marshes. Ultimately, these extensive marshes are really what are protecting our communities here on the Eastern Shore as well as along the coast of the entire United States. This is a really great example of sort of how we, the Nature Conservancy, are implementing coastal resilience and nature-based solution projects. You know, there's community engagement with not only the town of Wachapreague, but how can we make this happen along the entire Eastern Shore? We're working with the Accomack Northampton Planning District Commission to really engage the community, get them involved, have them come out and participate as volunteers, but also tell us, you know, how this information can help inform decisions that they're making for the future. We're working with the University of Virginia and looking at the research here. How do we build these structures? At what height? Where do we place them to really have the biggest impact on protecting these marshes? And of course, we're leading the restoration effort, going out to this location and experimenting and putting out oyster castles and other substrates that are bringing the oysters and building those reefs along the shoreline. Next slide. So protecting biodiversity, which we have done and we continue to do and will always do here on the Eastern Shore, and coastal resilience is absolutely dependent on community support. And it's dependent on connecting people with nature. And that's a big focus of our programs here. Next slide. We do lots of community outreach, working in and with the community. This includes outreach events in both Northampton and Accomack County. We provide public access to some of these protected lands. Here at Brownsville Preserve, where I sit today out on the islands and other areas. We've also recently created an advisory committee, a group of 8 community members that represent our diverse community here that really are helping us understand how we can better communicate with the community here, how we can listen to them, and how they can be partners with us in our work going forward. Next slide. Our long-term strategy, which is a long-term strategy that everyone should think about in terms of connecting people to nature, is through education. And we do this with professional development for teachers. We're providing experiences for teachers to learn how to do field experiences with their students. We're connecting those teachers with the barrier island system and the coastal dune system and teaching them how to make that information and the data they can collect as part of their curriculum, as part of the standards of learning. And then we are providing a field experience for every 5th, 7th, and 10th grader here on the Eastern Shore. They either come to Brownsville Preserve or out to Paramore Island, and they have a hands-on field experience. Some of these kids are coming out to a barrier island for the very first time in their life. They're riding on boats, they're in kayaks, and they're really experiencing hands-on their backyard and understanding their connection to this nature. Next slide. And video.
No matter what the age, you always see the kids' eyes light up. That, I think, is one of the most satisfying things of the days with the children, is to take them from, okay, we're out of the classroom, to, wow, I'm really learning things and having fun.
Boots. I forgot to say they get to wear boots and they get to muck around in the marsh, which is awesome. I'm going to end this presentation, at least the formal presentation part of it, with one of my favorite aerial photographs of the north end of Brownsville Preserve and Upshur Creek, where we're very fortunate to have a 1,250-acre preserve here. I want to thank the Volgenau family and the foundation for their leadership gift on the occasion of our 50th anniversary. I want to thank all of you for participating and allowing me to talk about this really special place on the planet. And I want to just talk about our continuing celebration of our 50th year. The voices and the faces that you saw through this video will be premiered in a longer feature film video on the occasion of our 50th, and we'll have information about that, COVID restrictions, thinking about that, how we'll celebrate this moving forward. And I want to thank Teleduction for spending so much time with us to create that film and these videos that you were able to share, really learning about our story and putting those stories to life in that video. So I will, we'll go to the next slide. We have a bunch of resources here, and I will take any questions that might have come in. Thank you all.
Thanks, Jill. I guess we all know I think that was a fantastic presentation, since I'm the outreach and education coordinator for this program. We have had some questions coming in through the live Q&A function, and I would encourage y'all to keep the questions coming as Jill's responding. I know we had some of these wonderful video clips from our film in there, and a lot of people were tuned into that. But don't hesitate to ask questions while she's answering other ones. We'll get to as many of them as we possibly can. And we're going to start off, Jill, and maybe I get to be biased and start off with an outreach and education question. Terry would like to know, she asked this during the coastal resilience portion of your presentation, but you may want to give a more general answer. Is this information being conveyed to our school children?
Absolutely. That's a great question. Absolutely. So, you know, you can't really talk about the Virginia Coast Reserve. You can't really talk about our nature. You can't take a child in a marsh or a barrier island without talking about the impacts due to climate change. And so when we take these students out, whether it's here at Brownsville Preserve in the marshes, you know, they're experiencing it hands-on, but they're also understanding the impacts, the changes maybe in the plants that are in the marshes. They're looking at the migration of these islands. They're using the tool in their classrooms to look at the changes over time in these islands. So it is something that not only do we talk about and think about and incorporate into every program that we have at the Virginia Coast Reserve, but it is part of our education program as well. It's also part of the education and outreach to the community, you know, providing the tool, providing information for our community leaders to be able to understand potential future scenarios and what impacts are going to have on our roads, on the infrastructure of our schools, where they're located, where ambulances will need to be able to reach people in these, you know, highly flooded, vulnerable areas. And so it's really coastal resilience and looking at climate change is really pervasive throughout all of our programs.
Great, thank you. Okay, I'm gonna just point you in all kinds of different directions. Now we've got one about eelgrass from John. He would like to know, this is a multi-part question, Jill.
Okay.
Where did the eelgrass come from that was the source for restoration from the 0 acre start?
Mm-hmm.
And a little information about the historic acreage. And how closely do we think we can approach historic levels, and how long do we think it'll take to get it back?
Yeah, that's a really good question. So I'll talk a little bit about sort of the disappearance of the eelgrass. You know, the eelgrass disappeared really throughout the entire coastal eastern United States in the 1930s, that fungal disease, and then severe storms in the 1930s. And, you know, in areas where it's a flowering plant, so in areas where there was a source of seeds and the water quality was good enough, the eelgrass began to rebound after it disappeared in the 1930s. And so that included many locations in the Chesapeake Bay. We didn't have, you know, we're kind of isolated, coastal bays are kind of isolated. So we didn't have that seed source over here in these coastal bays. And so the eelgrass, especially in the lower coastal bays, did not come back. There was some pretty big eelgrass beds up in Chincoteague Bay. It's actually where I did my graduate research long time ago. But as the eelgrass came back in the Chesapeake Bay, of course, as the 1960s and more people moved to the coast, we saw it declining there as well. But that's actually after we saw, I think, one small patch that maybe probably seeds rafted down from Chincoteague Bay in the lower coastal bays. Then we began taking seeds from thriving beds in the York River, Pocosin Flats, and bringing those seeds over here and dispersing them and seeing how well they would survive. And of course, they survived really well. We've planted only 600 acres, and we have over 9,000 acres now. So, you know, the restoration is definitely increasing the grass, but because of the water quality and now the seed source, it's expanding on its own. And so we have a lot of information. UVA and VIMS have done a lot of research looking at, you know, where the potential is for this eelgrass to continue to expand. And so we have lots of big acre numbers. You know, I think years ago when I first started with Nature Conservancy, we had a goal. Wow, what if we could really get to 10,000 acres? Well, we're already over 9,000. So we're thinking about where this will naturally expand and where we need to give it a little help for restoration as well. Did I get all those facets of that question in?
I think you did. I think you did indeed. And I want to tell you, Jill, by the way, before the next question, we're getting so much love in the chat function, and I just want to acknowledge that we're getting a lot of folks just saying they're enjoying the presentation and hearing about our work here. So I'm going to keep us on marine habitat restoration for one more. So Lauren says, thanks for such a visually engaging and informative talk. What is TNC's role in oyster aquaculture at the Virginia Coast Reserve? And I think that has a question that links to a question that I also saw come through saying, you know, are there positive effects to the seafood industry locally?
Sure. Well, there's direct effects. So, you know, when we're out there doing restoration, especially are targeted with the Virginia Marine Resources Commission, we select areas annually where we actually put shell piles. So we do oyster restoration with the state with shell piles. A lot of those places are sanctuaries. They're not fished for oysters, but because we're increasing the population of oysters with those sanctuary reefs, those oysters spawn and those oysters will then go to other areas. So it really helps those who are commercially fishing oysters, and it helps those who are doing oyster aquaculture. And just the incredible amount, the good water quality that we have is really a boon for the clam and the oyster aquaculture industry on the seaside and the bayside here. You know, they're able to expand, and we have the largest clam aquaculture industry in the United States right here on the Eastern Shore, as Tom Gallivan talked about in the video. You know, there are places that when we have big storms come through and they're impacted with decreases in water quality, we don't see that happen here. We have a big flush system. And so this protected land, this area is really pretty special in terms of aquaculture. And we look forward to working with the aquaculture industry to help us and our partners at the Virginia Institute of Marine Science really learn how to grow bay scallops and continue to reintroduce that fishery back into the coastal bays.
Great. Excellent. And we have a question now submitted anonymously, and I'm going to do a little combination number on this one as well, Jill.
Okay.
Is TNC still acquiring property on the Eastern Shore? And if so, what are the current priorities for land protection? And along those lines, are you working on any coastal resilience projects right now?
Yeah, it's a great question, and probably a question that we get asked all the time. And that is, you know, okay, well, there's historical protection, and you're managing and stewarding with all these partners, this great protected area. Are you still interested in land? And the answer is yes. You know, we're thinking about land protection in very different terms than we did 50 years ago. You know, 50 years ago, we were hoping to protect this intact coastal system, and that happened. We were protecting this intact coastal system for biodiversity, you know, for migratory birds that came through here. And that's still very important to the Nature Conservancy. But it kind of also answers that coastal resilience question. When we think about priority places on the Eastern Shore to protect now, we're thinking about those places that will help us with resilience. Where can we protect behind coastal marshes so that as sea level rise increases, those marshes can continue to migrate and we still have the benefit of those systems. So that's how we think about land protection in 2020 here on the Eastern Shore. And in terms of coastal resilience, the best example is that NFWF, National Fish and Wildlife Foundation project that I showed you at the very end, where we're using oyster substrate along a marsh edge and doing research, restoration, and community engagement around that as part of our coastal resilience program.
Great. Oh, another one of, I got to ask this one. Someone says, it's so great to see the kids. And they wonder, are we still able to support Accomack and Northampton County students and teachers during the pandemic?
Yeah, what a unique time for us to be thinking about outreach to the community and education. And, you know, it's, of course, it's impacting the way that we're reaching out to our teachers and our students. But we have been really fortunate to not only continue to build these relationships with the teachers and the administrators in Northampton and Accomack County during COVID, but we're actually helping through virtual presentations and workshops for teachers to get this information and provide a place for these teachers to talk about how to continue to incorporate this information, this nature, this conservation into their classroom curriculum. We're also doing some with safety protocols, we're doing some very limited in-person teacher workshops where teachers are actually able to get on boats and be outside and be in the marshes and see the shorebirds and you know, participate in data collection as part of professional development workshops. So, you know, this virtual versus some limited hands-on is getting us through until, you know, we hope very soon we'll be able to get kids in kayaks and boots and boats again out in the field.
You know, you love hearing your boss say something like that. A bird question. And a kind of a technology question. So someone writes in, I love seeing the aerial shots throughout. As a drone pilot myself, I'm wondering if TNC is using drone technology. Oops, I'm so sorry, this just bumped up here. I just lost part of the question. I'll paraphrase. If TNC is using drone technology to monitor any of our migratory bird species.
Yes, that's a great question. And, I think that we are kind of leading the chapter, especially here in Virginia with drone technology. We have one of our scientists on staff, that Zach Fulton, who works with Alex Wilkie, our coastal scientist in the migratory bird program. And they are really looking at ways that we can use technology like drones to maybe have less of an impact. Alex and her staff and our partners and volunteers are walking up and down this 50 miles of coastline from April to August, monitoring the success of the migratory birds nesting. And if we can do that with less impact, we're using drone technology to figure out how we can do that. And so it's also giving us a really good picture in real time of how these barrier islands are continuing to change and how that might impact migratory bird nesting areas and the islands and their resilience overall. So, we're very interested and leading the pack in drone technology out here on the shore. We're engaging our partners at the University of Virginia and at VIMS and trying to all work together to learn how we can incorporate drone technology into all aspects of our work, really.
Awesome. Okay, let's see. I've got one right here that just came through our Skype function. So just so you all know, now you just got a little behind the scenes. We've got Alex Wilkie Skyping me your questions. Alex, not Wilkie, as to what is the status of the Coast Guard station and its neighboring community? I'm thinking that this is in reference to the Wachapreague facility or the Paramore Island facility. What is the status of that building there in the neighboring community?
If you're talking about, of course, the last structure out on Paramore Island is part of the Coast Guard station on the north end of Paramore Island. And we have taken that station and built new docks to be able to have boats. We use that facility as part of our education program, part of our outreach program. We use the building to sort of have a place to take people while they're walking the Cross Island Trail or experiencing the beach, pulling nets, all that kind of thing. So it's part of our education program. And it's accessible to us because of the new docks and everything. And we continue just to use it as part of that. You can see it from Wachapreague. I think the town of Wachapreague has been very excited that they're seeing school buses show up and take students out, and that building is part of that facilities that we manage.
Difficulties. There we go. Okay, sorry about that. Yes, I can't wait to get back out there and get those kids out to that station. And we did have, I just want to give a shout out to a former volunteer who also commented along those lines and said he was involved in some of the restoration out there on that station. So we really appreciate
done that out there without volunteers. And that's really, I don't know if anyone is going to ask, but I'll tell you that there are opportunities to volunteer within our work in all aspects. So, the seeds that we use for eelgrass restoration, they're all collected by volunteers in the spring. Oyster restoration, you saw volunteers even in mass the last couple of weeks out there at the shoreline in Wachapreague, helping us to put together oyster castle and oyster reefs. They're building that substrate that we're taking out there. We have volunteers like Barb O'Hare in the last video that help us with our education programs. We couldn't provide the really small group opportunities of our hands-on field experiences without volunteers helping us with our 5th, 7th, and 10th grade. We have volunteers that come out and help us with outreach events. So there's just many opportunities for people to get involved as a volunteer at the Virginia Coast Reserve.
That's awesome. Roseanne, did you hear that answer? Jill, you won't be surprised that is indeed a question someone had, and about how they can find out more about the volunteer opportunities. And I see that Jen Dahlk has just posted her contact information in the chat. So that's how y'all can get in touch with her. And of course, we'll share that information after the fact as well. Let's see. Oh, Barb says, thanks for the shout out. So this is probably a quickie answer, Jill, but we have a question. Someone says, you may have mentioned this and I missed it, but can the public access the islands? Are there any restrictions, and could I boat or kayak there? Now you have me wanting to visit.
Yes, you know, we are a coastal wilderness, as we said, and so the barrier islands are pretty remote, and it does take a boat to get there. The only barrier island that is accessible by land is, of course, the Chincoteague National Wildlife Refuge and the Park Service Assateague Island National Seashore to the north. But all the islands owned by the Nature Conservancy are, there's about 90% of the islands are accessible to the public. But of course, we're balancing that public access with managing the resource. So there are some restrictions. You know, these are fragile systems where birds are nesting, and so we do have restrictions like staying below the high tide line during nesting season. There's no pets allowed on the island. There's no camping. There's no campfires, those kind of things on the islands to protect that resource. And one of the resources here on the screen is a brand new, exploreourseaside.org is a brand new website that was put together with the Nature Conservancy and all of those partners that own and manage these barrier islands that give you lots of natural history and information about the islands, but also all of that public access information. So that's a really great place to go and figure out where you want to go and what the restrictions might be by time of year and who owns them and all that kind of great information.
Absolutely. All right, and it looks like we've got a few more questions out there, but I think we're probably going to wrap up with this one, Jill, because I think you're going to probably talk about it for a second. This touches on the previous question about opportunities for volunteers. Edmund is interested in how we can get involved. He says, how can we get involved? Obviously with financial support, but how can we get involved in other ways as well? And I'd like to combine that with the question of if we have any next steps in mind right now.
Sure. So yes, of course, we're always looking for funding to help to continue to do this important work. Volunteers are a big part of what we do at the Virginia Coast Reserve. And again, on this page, you'll see a contact for Jen Dock, and Jen can put you in touch with all kinds of information about how to sign up for opportunities that we have, either for helping here at Brownsville Preserve, maintaining trails, or doing eelgrass or oyster restoration, or helping with island stewardship. All of those opportunities Jen can funnel you through and get you to a place where you can do a volunteer activity that you really enjoy. There's lots of opportunities at Brownsville. We have a trail that's open 365 days a year. You can come and take a hike through our birding trail here. You can run, you can ride your bike. It's a beautiful trail that goes through the marsh ecosystems and on this preserve. So that's a wonderful place. We sometimes provide guided walks and talks here at Brownsville. When we're not restricted by COVID, we have things like a springtime open farm where we open the preserve to the public, all aspects of the farm, not just the trail. We have an open house during the holiday season. Probably won't do that this year, but you know, we hope to do that later as safety allows. So all of those opportunities exist, and so please be in contact with us, be in contact with me, with Margaret, with Jen, to find out other ways that you can get involved.
Fantastic. And I think rather than accidentally run long with another question, we do have a few more, as I mentioned, and y'all, we will be sure to get these questions to Jill, and we will follow up with responses. At the end of the program, our team will put together an email that we will send out that has the link to this presentation, which you'll be able to share. And then we will have the answers to all the questions that we weren't able to get to now. And we'll share that with the whole group because we know everybody's interested in these topics. Jill, do you have any remaining comments before I wrap us up?
Yes, thank you. Thank you, Locke. Thank you, Margaret. Thank you, everybody who made this possible. And thanks to everybody for participating.
That's fantastic. Thanks again, exactly, for participating, all these excellent questions. And we will share those answers in the follow-up email. Y'all, we hope you take good care, and we're so glad you joined us. And now I'm going to hand it back to Locke to send us on our way.
Thanks, Margaret. And I can't undo I can't make my video show up, so maybe somebody else can. But I just want to thank everyone for joining us today for this presentation and for seeing close up how innovative, creative, passionate, smart Jill and her team at the Volgenau Virginia Coast Reserve are, as well as the rest of our teams around the state. Oops, my video went away again. There we go. That's okay. I'm just going to finish up here. You know, one of the things that I love about my role at the Nature Conservancy is I get to work with really exceptional people on an exceptional mission. And you saw today firsthand how Jill and her team are doing work that has local impact that's really important to the people of the Eastern Shore, but also has global impact and is helping people and nature literally across the globe. And so for that, Jill, we really thank you and your whole team. And then the other team that I would like to thank are all of you on the call today. The first part would be thank you all the members of the Volgenau family and the Volgenau Foundation for your incredible and long-term support of the Volgenau Virginia Coast Reserve. And thank you to everyone else who has helped us financially by volunteering, by giving us good ideas. We could not do it without you. And we just want you to know we're so grateful, you know, and it feels even better in this time of COVID when we can't be together to know that we've got a lot of you out there standing shoulder to shoulder with us as we tackle these important problems that are going to impact both people and nature. And so the final thing I'd like to say is just please remember that on the 29th of October, we're going to go all the way down to Southwest Virginia. It's probably the two furthest programs we have in the state to learn more about what we're doing in the Appalachian Mountains for conservation and how we're using the carbon markets to help us achieve our conservation goals. So with that, thanks, Jill, for a great presentation. Margaret, you're always an awesome moderator. And thank you to everyone who joined us today. And everyone stay safe and stay well. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Take care.